Tyrants. They made wrong decisions, they were bad presidents, a few were bloodthirsty, many of them were ordinary extremists, and there were also some warmongers. They are all a typological mix of the greatest criminals in the history of mankind. Political leaders of historical years, who were the architects of the most terrifying genocides, systematic murders, brutal wars, deadly blockades and criminal political reforms ever recorded in history. They ruled with an iron hand with a merciless lust for power. Unfortunately for people, they were the worst of the worst. The most cruel rulers that ever existed in history. Attila the Hun.
The ruler of the Huns Empire in the years 434 to 453, extending from the Urals to the Rhine and from the Danube to the Baltic Sea. Considered one of the greatest villains in history. He is remembered in most Western European countries as the personification of cruelty and rapacity. Twice he crossed the Danube and plundered the Balkans, but he was unable to take Constantinople. He tried to conquer the Romanesque Gaul, crossing the Rhine in 451, and marching all the way to Orleanum before he was defeated in a battle in the Catalan fields. He invaded Italy, destroying the northern provinces, but was unable to take Rome. He choked his own blood on the wedding night in the first months of 453.
Genghis Khan.
He was the founder and Grand Khan, Emperor, of the Mongol Empire, which became the largest empire in history. He came to power by uniting many nomadic tribes of Northeast Asia. After the foundation of the Mongol Empire and the proclamation of Genghis Khan began invasions, which resulted in winning the majority of Eurasia. He was a warrior and a ruler. He began modestly in vague circumstances, and managed to subordinate all the nomadic tribes of Mongolia. He ruled with his family a rigidly disciplined military state.
Vlad the Impaler.
Prince of Wallachia in the years 1456 to 62, known for killing his enemies by impalement. The most famous of the legend of the cruel punishments imposed for his reign, and the main inspiration for the vampire Dracula. He used cruel tortures. It is believed that he murdered nearly 20,000 men, women, and children in the city of Amlas. The people tortured by Vlad were subjected to the worst fears that a person can imagine. He died in an ambush in 1477. His cut head, preserved in honey, was sent to Istanbul.
Ivan IV of Russia.
Grand Duke of Moscow 1533 to 47. The first ruler of Russia and the first Tsar, from 1547. Also known as Ivan Grozny. He became famous for his cruelty. Beginning in 1560, thousands of people were executed on his orders. He led his repressive policy to the political and economic crisis of the state. In 1565, he introduced the police responsible for numerous massacres and robberies. The result of its operation was the death of about 100,000 people. Every day, his army gathered from 500 to 1,000 people who were tortured and murdered in a sophisticated way in front of Tsar and his son. He is remembered for his paranoid suspicion and cruel persecution of the nobility. He died of a stroke during a game of chess on March 28, 1547.
Leopold II.
The Belgian throne took over in 1865. In 1885 he became the ruler of the Free State of the Congo, a colony in Central Africa. He founded the International Society of Africa. He used the company to travel to Congo and reported claims for a plot 14 times larger than Belgium. It caused 14 countries to agree that Leopold would rule there with the help of a private militia. It was his private property. He ran a slave and plundered economy there, gaining rubber and ivory. He was one of the greatest criminals in history, contributing to the deaths of several million people. Despite the critical assessment of governments and the conscious admission of genocide, many Belgians still have great sentiment and respect for him.
Ismail Enver Pasha.
He began his career as a Turkish officer and leader of the Young Turks Revolution. In 1913, as a result of the coup, he came to power and managed the Ottoman Empire. The defeat at the Battle of Sarıkamış caused that Enver Pasha began to burden it with the Armenian community, which allegedly sabotaged. On April 24, 1915, the Turkish government issued a decree ordering the arrest of the Armenian intelligentsia and deportation of the Armenian ancestry to Syria and Mesopotamia. As a result of this operation, hundreds of thousands of Armenians died of starvation or were brutally murdered by Turkish soldiers and Kurds. In a few years, the number of Armenians in Turkey fell from 2.1 million in 1912 to just 150,000 in 1922.
Adolf Hitler.
Leader of National Socialist German Workers' Party. From January 30, 1933, Commander and Chancellor of the Reich. Man of the Year 1938 of Weekly Time. The ideologist of the German variety of fascism, the creator and dictator of the Third German Reich. A war criminal responsible for the greatest crimes against humanity. Recognized by most historians as personally responsible for racial politics of Nazi Germany, the Holocaust, and the death of millions of people. It led to the start of Germany by World War II, as a result of which about 50 million people were killed. On April 30, 1945, he committed suicide. It is assumed that he shot himself with a pistol, while chewing a cyanide capsule.
Joseph Stalin.
Soviet politician of Georgian descent. The dictator of the Soviet Union, with virtually unlimited power. From the death of Lenin in 1924, the leader of the Soviet Union. His policy caused a drastic reduction in food production throughout the country and a huge hunger. As a result of his policy and orders, from 2.6 million to 10 million people were killed by starvation. In the late 1930s, began a period of purges known as Great Terror, which consumed, from several to several dozen million deaths. In an alliance with the Third Reich, he made September 17, 1939 military aggression on Poland. He is perceived as one of the greatest tyrants and genocides in the history of Russia and the world. He is credited with murdering at least 43 million people out of 62 million annihilated in the USSR in 1917–87.
Adolf Eichmann.
Born March 19, 1906 in Solingen, in the Rhineland. He was a German and one of the main organizers of the Holocaust of Jews. He was hanged by the State of Israel for his participation in the Nazi extermination of Jews during World War II. The death of 5 million Jews on my conscience gives me extraordinary satisfaction.
Hideki Toyo.
Japanese politician and military, called the Hitler of the Far East. In the years 1941 to 1944, the Prime Minister of Japan. Recognized as a war criminal, condemned to death and executed December 23, 1948. He was the originator of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Responsible for the policy of expansion and the genocide and war crimes committed in Asia and the Pacific, resulting in the deaths of 8 million people. He published, among others, the order of ruthless treatment of Allied soldiers and the murder of captured aviators. He resigned from the position on July 22, 1944. In 1948, found guilty of war crimes and sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence was taken in Tokyo.
Kim Il-sung.
He was unpopular even among his citizens. He forced the Koreans to implement their sick ideas. He headed North Korea in the years 1948 to 1994. He introduced a command economy that enabled the government to take all decisions centrally. He adapted the Stalinist system to the Korean conditions and introduced mass political purges, without even creating the appearance of lawsuits. He created concentration and inhuman labor camps, eliminating political opponents. The number of victims of the system is estimated at over 1 million people as a result of genocide, concentration camps, labor camps, and executions.
Yakubu Gowon.
Head of the Nigerian government from 1966. In response to the secession of the Biafra Republic in 1967, Nigeria applied the economic blockade of the region, and in June 1967 it launched a military operation. In 1970 Biafra, completely devastated by the war, returned to Nigeria. It is estimated that during the conflict about 1 million people died, mainly due to the famine resulting from the economic blockade and the destruction of the agricultural life of the region. As a result of the war, 100,000 soldiers were killed and 1 million civilians died due to the blockade.
Mao Zedong.
Chinese revolutionary, political scientist, and communist leader of the People's Republic of China. It is believed that in the first 5 years from 1949 to 53 systematically exterminated from 4 to 6 million people. He organized a system of mass repression, introducing among others fixed amounts of enforcement. The Grand Leap and Cultural Revolution programs were the two most unfortunate initiatives in history. It is estimated that the program of the Great Leap has consumed 20 million victims. He believed that destruction and chaos could bring rebirth. He ordered the destruction of cultural objects and recognized authorities. It is believed that Mao Zedong's policy and political purge of 1949 to 76 caused 49 to 78 million people to die.
Idi Amin Dada.
One of the most cruel rulers in history. Military dictator and president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979. In 1971 he made a bloody coup and removed President Abbott from power. The coup d'état was supported by Israel and positively received in London. In 1971, when he was the head of state, he was promoted to the rank of Field Marshal. His rule was characterized by violations of human rights, political repression, ethnic persecution, judicial killings, and ethnic cleansing. Death estimates range from 80,000 to 500,000.
Pol Pot.
Leader of the Khmer Rouge movement and Prime Minister of Cambodia from 1976 to 1979. He caused 1.7 to 2.5 million deaths. His radical communist government forced massive migrations of entire cities to the countryside. He killed or displaced millions of people and left a legacy of disease and hunger. He murdered a significant part of citizens. The net result of his sick ideas was the death of about 1/5 of the Cambodian population.
Mengistu Haile Mariam.
President of Ethiopia and Colonel of Militia Derg. He managed Ethiopia from 1974 to 1991. The worst fame is covered by the period of Ethiopian Red Terror, which was a campaign of repression carried out by the militia Derg. Thousands of people died and families found their loved ones dead on the street. It is estimated that 0.5 million people were murdered during this period. Mengistu burdened families murdered people with the tax on the return of a dead body. This was described as a tax on a wasted bullet. The bodies left on the street were devoured by wild animals. Mengistu's rule is described as one of the worst mass murders in African history. In 2008, he was convicted in absentia for the crimes of genocide.